Well, hello and good morning, everybody. My name is Jake, and I will be your moderator for today's special guest presentation. For this webinar, we have Daniel Martin, who's the Director of Marketing at Permaloc Corporation, which they are a premium manufacturer of edging and restraint solutions for the landscape and for green build applications. So Daniel actually has been in the industry for quite a while and has really gained a passion for serving the landscape architects in the community and really focusing on students and emerging professionals, working with LaBash, ASLA, committee member services, just all kinds of really cool things. And we're really excited for him to be a part of this and show us some more about edging and really the design of those types of things. And before we get too far into it, definitely want to make sure everybody who's watching this live is aware for the view options. If you're in full screen, you want to get out of that. Up at the top, you can get out of that full screen mode. And also, we really would enjoy questions throughout the webinar towards the end. However, we're going to kind of try to answer those. Please use the Q&A box to type those questions, get them sent in to us, and we can answer those as they come in. So other than that, it is being recorded. So if we want to go back on anything, it will be posted up on our website, and you're going to be able to watch it there as well. So without any further ado, Daniel, go ahead and take it over.
Great. Thank you so much, Jake. I appreciate that introduction and appreciate the offer for us to be on today and talk about edging. As Jake mentioned, I'm with Permaloc, and we are kind of the world's leading manufacturer and experts in all things edging. We love edging. We love to talk about it. So we are happy to be here. Like Jake mentioned, we're going to go over an introduction to edging and restraint systems for different applications, including landscape, hardscape, and green build applications. While our products are available through LandFX, and you can get our details and things like that, we're not really going to dive into software and how our products work in there. This is just going to be more of an overview about edging and its uses. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. We're going to start with the reason we're all here, and I mean not just here at this webinar, but why landscape architecture is here, period. Starts with this guy. I don't know how many of you recognize this picture. You might be used to seeing him as an old man with a big long gray beard and a bald head and a cane, but this is Frederick Law Olmsted. This is young Brooklyn hipster Olmsted, who this was about the time that he created Central Park and drew that plan. And Olmsted has a quote that we like to talk about. It's a long one, I'll kind of go through it, but there are a couple key things we'll highlight. But what artist so noble as he who with far-reaching conception of beauty and designing power sketches the outline, writes the colors, and directs the shadows of a picture so great that nature shall be employed upon it for generations before the work he has arranged for her shall write his intentions. So what is he saying here? He's saying that landscape architects are so amazing that they're drawing things that aren't even going to really become what they envision for generations. As an example, this is Olmsted's original drawing for Central Park. And you can see, a lot of familiar features. Those of you who have been there familiar with Central Park, which I'm sure all of you are, you can see familiar features. But from the drawing to what that looks like today, a lot of those lines, those pathways, the edge of the waters and the reservoir are exactly the same all of these years later. Kind of go through that a couple more times. And that's how important lines and edges are to the work that you do. And that's why we are going to talk about that today. You want those lines to last the lifetime of your project for those generations. All right, so let's get into that. How do we make our projects sustainable, and what is sustainability in the landscape exactly? So sustainable landscapes are responsive to the environment, regenerative, and can actively contribute to the development of healthy communities. Also, sustainable landscapes sequester carbon, clean the air and water, increase energy efficiency, restore habitats, and create value through significant economic, social, and environmental benefits. So what exactly goes into this and how is it accomplished? Whoops, my bad. Jumped ahead there when I shouldn't have. Let's go back here. My apologies for that. But to accomplish a sustainable landscape, you must be thoughtful and strict on the design and product selection for the project. The durability and longevity of the products that are selected, as well as the environmental benefits of the products, are important. Sustainable measurement tools such as LEED and CITES, things you're familiar with like that, Living Building Challenge, they take into account what they call the life cycle assessment to evaluate the sustainability of a product. What that basically boils down to is what it is made of and how long it will last. So those are things to consider when selecting products for your projects. All right, so big question with edging is, why would you use edging? You know, that's one of the first things that might come up. We're going to boil it down to kind of 3 reasons for the purpose of this presentation. The first thing is you want to maintain the designer's original intent for the look of the landscape. So when a landscape architect or a designer sits down and draws a plan, there are very specific reasons for the way that you draw the lines. So whether those reasons are for form and looks, or a certain aesthetic you're looking for, or whether they're functional and structural in nature, it's important that the project looks and performs the same on day 1 as it does in year 35. So just like that Olmsted project we looked at, how those lines stayed the same, his intent has been maintained for all of these years, and that's what you want in your projects. For instance, if a curved line is drawn for a landscape bed, that edging will maintain the line exactly as it was drawn. So without edging, that bed would grow or change shape every time someone came in and spade cut it. Or if it weren't maintained and spade cut, it would eventually completely disappear. So the next reason for putting edging on a project is that it just looks better. When the human eye looks across a landscape, clean lines and true separation of adjacent materials increases the visual appeal. So the level of visual aesthetics is increased when you add that edging in there. Additionally, the project will continue to look its best when materials are contained. Say a brick paver area, that's going to stay tight and clean when it has edging around it. Mulch is not swept away into areas where it shouldn't be. Everything just remains orderly and tidy. And the last reason we'll discuss for using edging on your projects is that it is going to reduce the cost. You'll have cost savings in long-term maintenance expenses. So crews won't have to come back and reset pavers. Someone will not need to return multiple times a year to spade cut the bed line like we were just discussing. All of these things add up to considerable savings for the project owner over the lifetime of the project. It's important to know that edging is not a one-size-fits-all product. There are literally hundreds of shapes and sizes of edging, and the product choice depends completely on what the application is or what the edging is intended to do. There are many applications that require edging. If you think of anywhere in a landscape where 2 different materials or textures meet, that is a place where edging can and should be used. Again, each application can require a different shape, height, thickness, or even color of edging. The more you can know about the various applications, how they work, what they're for, what materials are involved, the easier it will be for you to select the proper edging or restraint system to use for that installation. So with that in mind, we are now going to look at some of the more popular edging applications. Keep in mind that each project you work on could have multiple applications on it, requiring the use of a variety of edgings. So this image we're looking at here of this hospital shows 6 different applications on this one project, from the roof, the building's edge, to the landscape, to the walkways, driveways. We're going to look at each of these 6 applications separately. And then we're also going to cover a couple additional applications that are listed in the bottom here. And these are going to be really your most common 8 applications that edging gets used on. All right, so let's first look at landscape beds. This is definitely the most recognized and popular use for landscape edgings. Edgings can be used to separate turf from planting soil, from mulch, stone, glass cullet, really any bedding material that can be used. So in this slide, you can see a 3D rendering of what this application looks like. Typically a flat edging is the best choice for landscape beds. This allows the edging to flex and create the curves required for this application. In this edging, stake pockets are located along the outside of the edging to allow a stake to be driven into the soil, which holds the edging in place, prevents it from coming out of the ground or moving. And there's usually a method for connecting each adjacent section together. This is necessary to prevent separation at the joints. And you can see here a couple images that show what that typical application looks like. You know, usually along the building, nice, smooth, graceful curves, that sort of thing. Here you're seeing it separate turf and mulch. This is, when you think of landscape edging, this is typically what people think of. All right, let's look at the next application. Here we have a maintenance strip. A maintenance strip is an area along a building or a fence or some type of structure, typically filled with stone. This area eases the burden of lawn maintenance for the area, prevents grass from growing right along the structure, so you don't need to get a mower or weed whacker, edger or something right along the building. It allows that separation. It's often referred to as a drip strip as well, because it provides an area for water to drip from the rooftop without creating a muddy area on the turf below. In this type of application, pin straight lines are usually desired. This creates a nice parallel line along the structure. If that line had any waves to it, it would be a negative that the eye would pick up on, which would cause the aesthetics to not be as clean. Let's look at what this looks like here. You can see in the pictures these very straight lines, you know, along that fence, along the building. Greatly reduces the need to maintain lawn against these structures, as we mentioned. And in the rendering, you can see the difference between this edging and the landscape bed edging we just looked at. There's a small foot or return on the bottom of the edging along the entire length, and that allows the edging to remain completely rigid. And this is going to get you those perfectly straight lines with no curves or waves or tangents. And then an additional side benefit of having that foot there, since these are typically some sort of stone, the stone can rest on top of that foot, and it helps keep everything in place in the ground and uniform. You can see the same kind of staking system with a loop on the side of the edging here also to keep it in place. So what this gets you, as opposed to, you know, trying that one size fits all landscape edging with that foot and that perfectly straight rigid line, not only are you going to get better visual aesthetics and have a better looking installation, but it's going to be a huge time saver on the install for the contractor. They're not going to have to spend lots of time trying to get that flat edging straight without waves. They can just slap this down and immediately have a straight line. Okay, let's take a look at our next aggregate walkway. Our next application, sorry, is aggregate walkway. Now, typically, these are winding paths filled with some type of aggregate. That many options on the aggregate could be decomposed granite, pea gravel, crushed shells, any type of small stone. A lot of those are regional, depending on where you are, what type of aggregate is used. These walkways often have a compacted subbase underneath the aggregate, but many times the aggregate is placed right on top of the native soil. So a couple installation methods for that. We're just going to take a look at one of these now, which is the most common, and that is having a compacted base below the aggregate. So here we're looking at a couple aggregate walkways with a compacted stone base. This method with the compacted base allows you to use an L-shaped edging that is spiked into place. The spike is driven through holes in the base of the edging. Typically a 10-inch spiral steel spike is used. This creates maximum holding power. That spiral spike is going to get a lot more bite into the compacted base as it winds its way in, as opposed to a straight shank spike, which can cause some displacement and allow it to come out and be pulled out a little easier. In this type of application, the edging rests on top of the compacted base. The aggregate is placed then on top of the edging. So this provides a nice clean edge along the edge of the aggregate. And it also means that the aggregate doesn't need to be topped off every year because it's being held into place and not washing out into the adjacent turf. And it allows the turf to grow up right along the aggregate very healthily, as there's not aggregate and that, killing out the turf or preventing it from growing or drowning out the weeds, or the roots, sorry. So now you have a nice clean edge with good healthy turf growing right up adjacent to your aggregate walkway. The L-shaped typically has V-notch holes or V-notch stamps in it, which allow it to be curved. So that's going to allow you to form those nice curves in your walkway without having to use tools or things on the job site to cut it. It'll easily form those curves. In cases where there's not a compacted base under the aggregate, the edging and installation could be similar to what we had just looked at for either landscape beds or maintenance strips, where you would use a product that would have a stake that would hold it in place. So those are the options for aggregate walkways. Going to cover some more things that are similar to this. Let's move on to the next application where instead of aggregate on top of that L, you're going to be putting brick pavers. So pavers are continually increasing in popularity for patios, pool areas, driveways, walkways, entire plazas. It seems to be, you see more and more pavers in public spaces and even in homes as opposed to concrete or asphalt. Variety of shapes and colors available make it a stronger design element than traditional concrete or asphalt for these types of applications, which is why it's gaining popularity. The pavers themselves can be made out of concrete, clay, rubber, or a number of other materials. But edging of some sort is almost mandatory on a paver project to keep those pavers in place so they don't begin to migrate and separate, which not only causes a visual detriment, but it could also be a safety issue, especially in public places. So here we see a couple photos of what a paver installation looks like. Both of these are just simple walkways. But in the drawing at the top, we can see how this looks very similar to the aggregate walkway application that we just looked at. On top of the edging, you do see a small layer of setting sand. This allows the pavers to be leveled for a tidy, safe pavement. It's important to note that the ideal edging height is about halfway up the paver. So say it again, about halfway up the paver is the ideal edging height for paver installation. It's high enough to prevent the pavers from moving laterally, yet low enough that it's not visible once the adjacent material is in place. So most paver applications, like the picture we're looking at here on the left, you do not see the edging at all. It is actually below that adjacent soil. All right. The next application will seem also very similar to the other one at first, but they're fundamentally quite different. On the surface, permeable pavers look like regular pavers. If you're standing on them, if you're looking, for the most part, it looks the same. However, they're installed in a method that allows water to pass through them and return to the ground instead of running off the top of the pavers into the drainage system. This prevents an abundance of stormwater runoff, which can cause many environmental and health issues in communities. And the runoff mitigation has been a significant focus for many communities around the country and the world. Many municipalities, cities are putting laws into place or incentives into place to get people to stop that runoff. So that's where you're seeing things like permeable pavement and green roofs come into play. So while they look the same, really very different in how they're installed. So let's look at that. So there you see those walkways, looks like what we were just looking at. But let's look at the rendering. You can see construction method is quite different. Instead of having sand and a compacted base under the pavers, there's a setting course of chipstone and an open graded base with number 57 stone. And these stones allow the water to pass through. They don't have fines, nothing that would prevent water from passing through. There's also a gap you can see there between the pavers that is filled with the chipstone to again allow water to move below the surface and continue down. So what we get into here with construction method is that open grade base prevents a spike from being used because there's nothing for the spike to bite into. If you put one of those spiral spikes into that open grade base, you'd be able to pull it right back out. There'd be no holding power at all. So how does the edging stay in place? Well, that's where this unique installation method comes in. A geogrid textile, you can see that black triangles, they're all combined together, is a geotextile, and it's placed between the two layers of stone. So on top of the 57 stone, but under the setting course of chipstone. This creates a friction-bound plane with a high degree of pull-out resistance. So with that geogrid setting between those stones, you could pull, and it's not going to go anywhere. Well, then you can take a capture plate and affix it to an edging, sandwiching the geogrid between the two, and now the edging can't be pulled out from the installation. And what's even more appealing about this feature is that now when you load the pavement, if a vehicle or something drove on those pavers, as it pushes the pavers down, it's actually going to draw the restraint in, making it an even stronger installation as opposed to a standard brick paver installation where as you load the pavers, it wants to push the edging out. So not only is permeable an environmentally friendly application, but you can actually get a stronger, longer lasting application using this. And even including other things that we didn't talk about, like potholes and frost heave and things like that you get in a standard. Since the water is moving here and continuing down into the ground plane, you don't get that kind of damage to the pavers either. So they say right now permeable pavers compared to standard paver installations, it might be about 80-20, 80 standard and 20% permeable. But within the next 10 years, that should flip-flop, where most of the pavers that are going to go down are going to be the permeable variety to allow that water runoff, or water to run down instead of run off. All right, moving right along. If anybody has questions during this, I don't mind you interrupting me at any point, Jake.
Yeah, no worries. Just a reminder for people to get those hammered out. There's nothing yet, so we'll just keep going.
All right, excellent. Let's continue on to asphalt surfaces. So there's many times, especially in larger scale projects, where budgetary reasons call for using asphalt instead of concrete or pavers for hardscape surfaces. You know, asphalt can go down much quicker and cheaper. But the problem with asphalt is it's notorious for having rough, broken edges that can be an eyesore in a professional landscape. So this is why it's important to add a restraint system of edging to prevent breaking and cracking and allow for a well-defined edge that will still look good. So it's possible to use edging in these asphalt applications and still get a nice clean look like you would get with your concrete or your pavers. So here we're looking at a couple of asphalt installations, one at Brooklyn Bridge Park, one at the Presidio or Letterman Digital Arts Center in San Francisco. These are just nice winding paths, but other asphalt installations or applications could include parking lots, driveways, those sorts of things. But you'll notice the green grass growing right up against the edge and the nice clean line on the edge of that asphalt. You're not getting that breaking and cracking. You can see in the drawing here that this installation again is very similar to what we've been looking at in the last few with pavers and aggregate walkways. You've got a compacted base, you've got an L-shaped edging that is spiking into that compacted base. But here, instead of putting aggregate or pavers on top of that, we have got a layer of asphalt. So that asphalt is hot poured right on top of the edging and then compacted down so that it's right even with the top edge of the edging. The asphalt will harden around the lips and channels in the edging and make it permanently attached, so there will be no separation along the border of the asphalt. So what this is going to do is prevent those cracks and breaks along the edge, and it's also going to allow you to get grass growth right up along the asphalt, so you don't have those brown dead spots that you get in so many standard asphalt applications. Okay, and our next application is sports surfaces. This also works the same way for play surfaces. So any sort of rubberized surface. It's very similar to asphalt surfaces, but the aggregate is bound with a rubberized material, which allows for less impact on knees and joints and also makes it a little softer for those play areas. The same method is used for poured in place, play surfaces, playgrounds, play areas, tracks, running tracks, etc. And again, here edging maintains a nice edge and strengthens the entire installation. There is one primary difference in that the edging needs to have weep holes in it, which allow water to be pressed out of the rubberized surface to prevent damage due to trapped water. So looking at this, you can see a drawing in detail that's very, very similar to the asphalt. In this instance, in fact, they have poured asphalt for a coarse layer and then come with a layer on top of that of the rubberized surface instead of pouring a full deep rubberized surface. And if you look in that channel of the edging, you can see where there is a weep hole that will allow that water to be pressed out. So as the rubberized surface is compacted due to people running on it, walking on it, etc., it will actually move the water towards the edge and send it out the side of the edging. This could be done in a variety of ways. You could do a full pour of the rubberized surface, or you can do the asphalt and the rubberized surface separately. And that is it for the athletic sports surface and play surface. Okay, Getting into our last application that we want to cover in kind of these popular applications, moving into green roof. As part of the green building movement, green roofs have grown in popularity over the past decade or so, maybe a little more than a decade in North America. But in some European countries, especially Germany, you know, they go back, and even in parts of America, hundreds of years, green roofs have been used. Basically, a green roof is just a roof of a building that has been partially or completely covered with vegetation and growing media. And it's all placed on top of a waterproofing membrane that prevents leaks. Many benefits of green roofs include environmental, social, and economic benefits. I won't go into the benefits of green roofs in depth, but if you're looking for more information on that, you can find it from a number of sources online, including Green Roofs for Healthy Cities. So let's look at how edging is used on green roofs. You can see here a couple images where the edging is separating pavers and the planting in one of these, and then some nice little stone water runoff strips in the other image. So everywhere you're seeing two materials meet, again, there is an edging in there to keep each material where it is supposed to be. There are many ways to build out a green roof, including built-in place and modular. The image we see here is a built-in layers on top of the roof, but many modular or tray systems are available, which allow the green roof to go on the rooftop fully grown on day one. But no matter which method is chosen, edging is important both aesthetically and structurally. You can see in the drawing here that the edging is placed on top of the waterproof membrane. So you've got your concrete roof deck, you've got a waterproof membrane on top of that, and then the edging is setting on top of that waterproof membrane. And that allows the edging to separate what here is a stone ballast and the growing medium and vegetation. You know, as I said, it could be a stone ballast, it could be pavers, it could be wood decking tiles, you know, any number of things that are used on a green roof, depending on if it is an accessible rooftop, like the one on the left, or just a visual and environmentally beneficial one like the one on the bottom. You can see in the side of the edging in the wall that there are drainage holes. These are very important in rooftop applications as they allow water to pass through and to continue towards the drains and run off the roof. You don't want to pool water or, you know, cause a lake on top of a roof, as even with the waterproof membrane, that could eventually cause a problem with leaking and also could create a weight issue. Again, I won't go into all of the construction issues or things related to green roofs now, but there is lots of information out there, and also happy to answer questions if those arise. All right, so finishing up, that was the last of the common applications that edging are used for in landscape, hardscape, and green build. So now let's talk a little bit about edging materials and the different types of edging that are available. So landscape edging and restraints have been around for a long time, available in a number of different materials and types, and we're just going to quickly cover some of those. So first, we have aluminum. Now, aluminum is one of the newer materials used for edging, yet it's one of the most popular. Landscape architects and other specifiers turn to aluminum as the material of choice in the majority of cases. And the biggest benefits of aluminum are that it remains incredibly durable while maintaining a relatively light weight. The alloys and tempers that are used for aluminum edging also allow it to be remarkably flexible to allow for smooth curves and clean angles. If there's any drawback to aluminum, it is that it can be a bit more costly than some of the other materials we'll discuss. However, it can be said its longevity and easiness to work with can save money in the long run. Kind of touching back to that life cycle cost analysis we discussed earlier. Another popular choice for professional landscapers in edging is steel. People tend to think of steel as being very durable, and it is exactly that when it's in the landscape. Like aluminum, it comes in a variety of thicknesses for various project types. One downside of working with steel is that it can be incredibly heavy and cumbersome to work with. Especially thicker material is very difficult to bend to get those curves and corners that you might look for. Aesthetically, steel will tend to rust over time. There can be safety issues due to sharp edges and loose stakes and connections. And it can be costly in some circumstances, especially as compared to some of the other ones we'll talk about, like plastic and things like that. But overall, steel, very good long-term product for that long-term line. All right, next let's look at plastic. Plastic is very popular, especially in residential applications, and very particularly in some geographic locations. Like plastic will be very popular in California, say, as opposed to the Midwest. And some of that has to do with weather and frost heave and things like that. You can also pick up plastic. It's very readily available. You know, you can get it at almost any store, big box store, do-it-yourself store, that type of thing. So that's one reason for its popularity. So the biggest benefit of plastic is price. It can be found very cheap in many instances. It's also incredibly lightweight, making it easy to transport and move around on the job site. So price and weight are probably the biggest benefits. But the biggest downsides to plastic edging is that it will not last for long periods of time and needs to be replaced every few years due to frost heave or damage incurred from landscape equipment such as mowers or trimmers. So it needs to be replaced, but the cost effectiveness of it makes that a viable option if you don't mind the work. Plastic can be difficult to work with. A lot of plastic comes rolled in coils, and it likes to maintain that shape, so making it hard to get straight lines or even smooth curves without waves or kinks sometimes, because it wants to maintain that coiled shape if it's that type. Other plastic, such as the bender board type product, comes in strips, so it avoids that problem. A few more materials used for edging to consider. One would be wood. Many people like wood for its natural look, but of course wood will not last indefinitely and will begin to rot or break down. So if you're looking for that 150-year Central Park edging, wood's probably not your way to go. And due to its size, wood does not always tend to lend to the clean look that many people are after. It remains visible and is more of a decorative type of edging. Another option that's becoming more popular over the last decade is concrete curbing. While this edging can be quite durable since it is concrete, its price can be cost prohibitive due to the machinery required. And it would also be one that would be considered more decorative than functional. Depending on how it's installed, things can travel underneath it. It could even crack and cause weeds and invasives to move through it. And there are a ton of other options. You'd be amazed how many things people use for edging. And even one of the most popular others would be no edging at all, just using a natural edge or going in and cutting it with a spade or an edger on a regular basis to keep the line clean. Other things could be using brick pavers, bullet pavers, lining them up, and there are plenty of decorative type fence edges, things like that. So those are the materials that we're going to cover. And then I also want to get into a very important thing to remember when you are looking at edgings, is that all edgings are not created equal. Obviously, there are different materials we discussed, but there are other things to consider when selecting an edging. Edging manufacturers use nominal measurements when talking about edging sizes, particularly in regards to thickness. For instance, very popular edging size, if you're familiar with edging, you've probably heard 8 by 4. So 1/8 inch by 4 inch is a popular edging. And that 1/8 inch is considered primarily by manufacturers to be the size of the top bead. So the very top, when you're looking down on the edging, that's your 1/8 inch. But the thickness of the remainder of the body can range anywhere from 52 thousandths to 78 thousandths of an inch. So there's a broad range in there of the actual thickness of an 1/8 inch edging. So when you are looking at edging from different manufacturers, it's important to be aware of that difference, that there could be a considerable less amount of edging thickness, which is going to make it much less durable in the landscape. Also, various edging manufacturers provide different features and accessories with their products. So you'll want to consider these when selecting an edging, as it may affect the degree of difficulty during installation, as well as how it performs after installed. These could be things like connection method, staking method, or accessories that allow for things like grade changes, straight lines, curvability, so forth. Lastly, you'll want to consider that even when dealing with the same material, say plastic, there can be many different recipes that yield different results. For instance, in plastic, you have polyethylene and polypropylene, and those two recipes of plastic are going to behave very differently when exposed to heat, cold, and even the shape memory, like we talked about with coil. So that's also something to consider and think about when selecting your edging. Okay, so we've learned a lot this session about edging, probably more than many of you have ever thought about edging in your life. Again, we live it and breathe it and sleep it and everything here, so we tend to get into the details. But all that we've talked about, how do you choose? So what do you want to do when you're choosing this edging? Here's a few things to look at. First, performance. You're going to want to choose an edging product that is made from a durable material and is loaded with features that will make it perform for the lifetime of your project. So balancing out those two things in performance, it's going to be important for you. That's going to be the #1 thing to be concerned about. Next, we'll look at aesthetics. So here you're going to determine the look of the edging that you would like in your landscape. Are you looking for a decorative edging that's going to lend to a certain look? Or are you looking for a functional edging that will maintain a clean line without being seen? Or some combination of both? You know, so here it's for your project, what do you want that edging to look like? Another important factor is availability. It doesn't do you any good to select an edging for your project that is not available in your area or available when you need it. So you're going to want to look for edging products that are readily available or can be shipped in when you need them. And next, you're going to consider the cost. It's important to know how much you or your client are willing to spend. 24 karat gold edging might look nice, but probably not too many people willing to pay to put that in their ground. So when thinking about cost, it's important to remember price versus cost. That's something that a lot of people will overlook. They're like, well, the price of this one is less, so let's do that. But you're going to want to consider the overall cost and the savings in labor, in time, and in future replacement, because that might make something that the price is more be less cost in the long run. And lastly, you'll want to consider the installation method. You want an edging that is easy to install. Again, like we mentioned, it's going to save time and labor on a project. Okay, that is the introduction to edging. So we've wrapped up with about 13 minutes where we can spend answering some questions, cover anything that you'd like me to cover in addition. So kind of leave that open for Jake to handle any questions that may have arisen.
All right. So yeah, I did actually get one from Jonathan, and if you wouldn't mind, I don't know if you need to go back there or not, but the diagram that you had for permeable pavers.
Okay, I can hop back. Let's fly back there real quick. Permeable, there it was.
Yeah,
Okay.
so if we're gonna compare permeable versus the non-permeable paver examples,
Yep.
how you suggested that half the height of the paver was mentioned from a detail perspective. It
Yes.
looks like it is the entire way up on the permeable. Is there a reason for the difference in that?
No, that's a great observation, and I think that's just in this detail they went all the way up, but there is no reason to go up more than halfway on permeable either, because again, you're just preventing lateral movement. So as long as you're covering, the bottom half of that paver, it's not going to be able to move laterally when vehicular traffic or pedestrians are right on the edge. It's going to prevent it from moving. And again, it's typically better on pavers when that edging is not visible at all. It's just kind of doing its job down there and not saying, hey, look at me. So yeah, this drawing, that's actually, I thank you for pointing that out. I've never even noticed that. But yeah, it does not need to go all the way up. Halfway up is adequate for permeable as well.
Perfect. And so I got another one, and this could probably vary quite a bit here, so we'll take it for what it's worth. But what is the typical minimum radius for edging? So if we're going around curves and doing things, obviously the flatter, thinner stuff, you're going to have more flexibility in. But what are there recommendations on what you should kind of stay to from corners and stuff like that, or not corners, but curves and stuff like that?
Yeah, and it's going to vary dramatically. Ideally, whatever edging you choose is going to do whatever design you want. So if if you had some really tight radius and curves, and because that made the design that you want, or even something that sticks out in my head is logos. So say you wanted to do planting or stone bed that had a logo in it, and maybe that logo has some tight radius in it. Ideally, the edging does what you want, and that radius is minimum radius, or is going to vary across the different materials that we talked about. But I would say most edging you're going to use, I can say from the Permaloc perspective, our edgings are typically can get down comfortably in the field to about a 15-inch radius, so about a 30-inch diameter circle, without any extra manipulation on the field. That would just be by hand. Your installers could get that without a problem.
Very cool. And then I'm assuming then there's no kind of guide or performance charts that this edging comes with that people could follow based on the material or recommended specs and stuff like that. It's just sort of what you feel like you can get away with, basically.
Yeah, every manufacturer might give you a different number based on their material. I will say at Permaloc, most of our stuff we say that 15-inch radius is the number that we give for all but one of our product lines that can comfortably be obtained in the field without, a roller or a former or something like that.
Very cool. And then last one for the aluminum edging specifically, or I guess we can apply it for anything, but from a vandal perspective, or just weathered or getting beat up from machines crossing it or whatever, do you find that there are better cases than others to kind of prohibit the beat and the wear down of some of that stuff?
Yeah, I think properly installed edging, I think that's the number one key to preventing damage, from just wear and tear, maintenance equipment, even, vandals could be. Just following installation instructions and methods and properly installing, again, like even the paver restraints, if that thing is halfway up, it's not visible, it's not going to get caught on a snowplow blade or something like that, where if you ran it all the way to the top or farther, that kind of thing could happen, which could cause damage. A bed edging, landscape bed edging, typically we would recommend the top bead of that bed edging is a 1/2 inch above grade, which is going to put it below, your grass line. But we see people install edging where they're basically setting it on top of grade, and that allows it to be caught on maintenance equipment. It makes it become a trip hazard, things like that. There are raised bed applications, and there is an edging that could be used for raised bed applications, but that's different than setting an edging that's not supposed to be a raised bed just on top of the ground as a raised bed. So I think very important in those regards is getting the right edging for the right application and making sure it is installed correctly. Does that answer that question?
Yeah, no, that's great. And it's one of those things, watching this is just such a great reminder that, the installation is super key to have a successful, coupled with the actual material, obviously, and the styles that you go for. But
Yep.
It's one of those things that I know you and I talked about. It's something that sometimes is left out of the design from a thought process until the very end. You're like, oh crap, I need edging for this, and it just gets put in,
Yep.
and it's not then done properly or with the right mindset, and that's when things kind of go awry. So it's definitely such a key piece of the design thought that I'll be pulling back into my repertoire for sure. So last thing too, and I know this is happening in the chat, but just for people watching this in the future, Sean, he made a great reference to a book called Opening Spaces by Hans Leudel and Stephen Bernard. It actually gets into the theory of space for landscape architecture, and how there's research that actually goes on that spatial perception is about 50% focusing on the ground plane itself. So just to hit home the importance of edging and the importance of those lines is super key. So thank you for that.
That's great. Thank you.
All right. Well, it looks like we're out of questions, and we're just a few minutes shy of that hour mark, which means that we get to go home early today.
Hey.
So everybody have a great weekend, and enjoy the extended holiday weekend, actually. And thanks for attending.
All right. Thank you, everyone.